Last week we saw a series of central bank hikes that went against what some policymakers would like to see. Are we set to return, though, to this environment where you're going to have these central banks continually under pressure from respective leaders elsewhere?
I'm afraid so. Last week was remarkable because not only did the central banks in Russia and Turkey defy their political masters, but they went beyond what the market was expecting. And that's remarkable. But I think that that's an aberration. I think what you're going to see is enormous pressure on central banks build up again. And the reason is very simple, is that they're very easy to blame. Central banks don't have big political advocates and lobbies. Their policies are difficult to explain. So unfortunately, these critical institutions are going to continue to be under significant political pressure.
And critically, Mohamed, something else that you touched on in the piece, this isn't isolated to emerging markets. We're going to see more of this elsewhere as well in developed markets?
Oh, absolutely. We're seeing it in the US, we're seeing it in Europe, we're seeing it Europe with the ECB, we're seeing it in the UK. And I think that it reflects frustration with a prolonged period of low growth. So when central banks do what they're supposed to do, they get blamed. And that's really unfortunate. And you see it, something as simple as Mark Carney at the Bank of England for delivering a chilling warning about what would happen if you get a disorderly Brexit. He immediately gets blamed by some politicians as playing politics. He's not. He's just explaining a scenario. And that's important for the public debate.
Mohamed, is this more than just rhetoric, though? More than just finding a scapegoat? Is it about a serious threat to operational autonomy? Is that what you think it is?
Yeah, I think the degree of threat varies from country to country. I mean, you saw it so clearly in Argentina, and the market punished Argentina for that. You've seen it in Turkey. South Africa, the Reserve Bank there is under significant pressure. It varies from country to country, and ultimately it's about governance. So yes, in some countries it's going to be very hard, but in others like the US, I don't expect President Trump's tweets to change in any way what the Federal Reserve is going to do.
So you don't think it will shape policy? Do you think it harms the transmission mechanism, though? Maybe not in the United States, but say in Europe. If President Draghi is continually under pressure all the time, can it hurt the transmission mechanism to some extent?
Yeah, what it hurts is the credibility of the institution. You know, when Mario Draghi got up in 2012 in July, and I was in that room and said, we will do whatever it takes, and believe me, it will work, he changed the outlook with words. They actually didn't do anything for quite a while. And I think that what the politicians have to realize is the more they attack central banks, the less effective the verbal guidance of central banks is going to be. And that's an issue for policy management. What's
interesting about this, though, Mohamed, is this is happening in the United States at a time when we've had GDP growth in and around 4%. Could slow a little bit, but could have a three handle as well. What happens when we go into a recessionary environment? Does this get worse?
Yes, it does. And same with trade tensions. If we don't resolve trade tensions, and I think they can be resolved, I think the rest of the world has to understand the game theoretics between the US and them. But if you resolve the trade issues, that's going to be less. But if we don't resolve the trade issues, and this interest rate issue remains on the radar screen, if the US goes into a downturn, then both will become worse.
And looking at the prospect of a downturn, Mohamed, just as a final question for you, these institutions look totally unprepared for the arrival of a downturn, whether you're looking at the balance sheet or on rates. Your thoughts on that, Mohamed?
Yeah, I think totally unprepared is in the right direction, but it's strong. The US has built a buffer. The ECB is very different. You know, they're negative interest rates. So they are totally unprepared for the arrival of a significant downturn. But in the case of the Fed, I think the Fed has built more of a buffer.